Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. From the Jethro's Barbecue Studio, I'm Justin Brady, and there's a new sheriff in town at the Des Moines Register. I'm not sure if you knew that. There's a new sheriff in town, and she joins us today. Rachel Stassen-Berger.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thanks for the invitation.
Before we get started, everybody, as your reminder, Jethro's is giving you $30 for free. There's no catch here. You just go buy a $100 gift card. That's literally it. And then they give you a $30 gift card. I mean, it's kind of easy. It doesn't really get any easier than that. Go to iowapodcast.com. There's a big banner at the top of the webpage. Click the banner. Rachel, I have tons of questions for you, but
let's go.
We'll start out with the most difficult one.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Are there any big changes people should expect? Because media, I don't need to tell you this, media, I think everyone always says, oh, in today's rapidly changing environment, we've been saying that for years, but we're here again in another change. Citizen journalists are everywhere. Has that changed direction at the Des Moines Register? Are you guys looking at new things or new changes?
Let me start with this. One of the things I've said to my staff repeatedly is that we are moving from strong to stronger. I think the Des Moines Register, not only does it have a legacy here in Iowa that is really meaningful, but the individual contributors to the Register are just amazing. I've been having one-on-one interviews with everyone on my staff, as well as the Ames Tribune and the Iowa City Press Citizen, and they're just really dedicated to the job. And so we certainly will change. We will improve. We will be more innovative in various ways. And maybe later on you can convince me to tell you a little bit more about that. So I think that we start from a base of strength, but we always have to do better. You know, whether you're a podcaster or a business person, tomorrow should be better than today. And so I ask my staff to be ambitious in their journalism, be ambitious with themselves, always try to do better. Some of the ways that we are trying to do better is more community outreach. You know, coming on this podcast in the midst of a busy startup at the Register is worth my time because I want to talk to your listeners and I want to get to know the community in a different way and I want them to get to know me.
Sure, doing your own PR a little bit.
Yeah, less PR and more explanatory.
Sure.
You know, I like it that it's going to take us a little bit to talk through everything of journalism, but, you know, I think that's one of the things that we have to do to really explain what we do and let people in.
Yeah, so, I mean, can I bend your arm to talk about some new stuff coming down? Are you launching new podcasts, new media channels? You have more tools than you ever have in the past, which is a double-edged sword, right?
Absolutely.
It's great to have so many access points to your consumers and your readers, but now they're readers, watchers, and viewers.
Right. And, you know, I think what people don't know who, you know, grew up with the Des Moines Register as just a print product,
right,
is we do have podcasts. We are active on social media. We have Instagram stories. We're on TikTok. Find us there. You know, we are playing on all of those fields. And I think one of the things we all have to bear in mind is things do move quickly. And so, you know, legacy media does not mean we shouldn't have the startup mindset, which is fail fast. And so, yes, we are going to be trying various new things, but I don't think we get rid of the core of journalism, which is listening to people and telling stories. And we have access that most people don't have.
Right. Yeah.
And so we get to share those in all those ways.
Yeah. I mean, so 2021, and I think you know this as well, these are coming from Edelman and it's coming from Gallup, but in 2021, 59% of Americans worried that journalists were lying to them. In 2025, that number is 70%. I'm sure you've spoken about this internally, but just to give you some comparison, government trust was 58 up to 69%. So trust in general is eroding everywhere. But in some numbers, like media is ranking worse than government.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think some numbers show from Gallup, like media is now ranking worse than Congress.
Right.
And I mean,
that's pretty bad.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Like they have to be trying pretty hard.
Yeah.
So what's going to be done about that? But why do you think that is?
Well, let's start with sort of bifurcating those numbers a little bit. If you dig down on some of the research, yes, there's a lot of distrust in media. But then if you look beyond the first numbers, I think Pew has done these studies occasionally.
Pew has as well, yeah.
That says that local media is actually more trusted than national media.
True.
And often print media or digital media is more trusted than television media. And so I think what we have at the Register, and frankly, the reason that I've spent my career in regional media is because we're much closer to the ground. Look, you may not like how we cover this political event or that political event, but you like it when your kid's is athlete of the week. You're going to brag to all your friends, all your family, and you get that from each one of our Iowa outlets that has that intimate relationship. Often you can know a reporter, you can talk to them, and I think that helps break down some of those trust barriers.
Yeah, absolutely does. And you are right, by the way. This isn't a talking point. National media is not doing great. Local media, to your point, is doing far, far better. And I think it's one of the big reasons is this, right? We can hold our journalists in local accountable. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're not insulated in walled gardens. Last time I checked, none of your reporters are making like $20 million with giant contracts and walled gardens, right? They're in the community, they're very accessible. We can shake our fist if they get something wrong. Is that one of the reasons that local journalists, there is a little bit more favorability there?
Absolutely, and I think it's what we cover. If you look at the national media, God bless them because they do hard work. I've got nothing against them. But, if everyone is covering the same thing that's happened at the White House, you could get that from anyone and say, well, why would I trust you more than I would trust the next one? You're not going to get that at the Des Moines Register. We are not covering the same thing everyone else is covering. We are covering things that happen in your city, on your block often, in your community. And so whether it's political or sports or, environment or dining, you get that right here and we can provide it.
Yeah. Gen Z is one interesting group. They actually, it's not the same. They have trust in local media more than social media, but it's close. They actually view social media. I think it's 54% of Gen Z trust social media news, and it's 60% for this is national news numbers.
Okay.
So those numbers are actually better, probably more favorable for local. I just don't have that
Sure.
data. But that's kind of striking that Gen Z is considering social media a near equivalent news source as local media or national media. So is it as simple as getting yourself in those channels, or is there a different solution there?
There's a couple different things. One is, it used to be back in the day, they would do all these surveys and they would say, well, do you trust your newspaper or do you trust digital news? And that was after we were all digital. Like there is not that quick dividing line. And so I mentioned, we're pretty active on TikTok. That's the Des Moines Register, that's local media. It's also social media. So we are playing in those fields. So I don't know that Gen Z is necessarily saying, well, I trust, the Register on TikTok this much, but I trust my friend on TikTok this much. And so I do think there's some blurring of those lines a little bit in a lot of people's minds. And look, social media does all those intimate things that we were just talking about that local media does. You do see a face, you see someone that you might know, you see someone that you get used to. Community makes a difference no matter how you are delivering it. Now, we all know that there's places in social media that frankly shouldn't be trusted, that are, spewing conspiracy theories or making up facts, all those kind of things. And I think what we need from this generation and the next generation and the next generation is, put on your thinking cap. Ask yourself, what is the source of this? Ask yourself, can I trust this? Look at what else they've put out. And you might have a different relationship with it. You might decide, yes, I do trust it. Absolutely. You might decide, well, it sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, one of the criticisms, Gallup, 12% of Republicans trust the media, 54% of Democrats trust the media. And now 2022 is actually Democrats were up 70%. So that's even flown. That's even dropped. It's dropped in every key group. Is there, in your opinion, a partisan bias in journalism? Is there I think it would be fair to say there are your CNNs of the world are left and your Fox News of the world are right. but is there a partisan bias at the Register or not? And this isn't a trick question. I don't have an analysis of headlines.
Right.
I don't actually have that. But just in your opinion, what is there? And does it need to be more neutral, or are we pretty much good right now?
Well, I think there's a couple different things that get blended there. Frankly, people are going to see what they want to see. I was talking to some liberal family members this weekend, and they were like, oh, the New York Times did this, and it means they're out to get Democrats.
Yeah.
If you look at that with a lens, you say, oh, wait, they also did this story about Republicans. They also did this story about the socialists. They also did this story, but you're not looking at it through that lens. And so often when people come to me and say, the Des Moines Register is too liberal or too conservative, I don't argue with them because I'm not going to change your view. I'm going to tell you what we do. So we do talk to Republicans. We do talk to Democrats. We do try to give them a fair shake. We make, minute decisions on, print play and what photos we will use and what digital aspects we will pick up. And when we push something, so we have push alerts. So it's all sort of balanced. But I'm not going to argue with someone who, comes at it from a certain point of view because that's their lens that they see in the world. And then there's the difference between the editorial side, the opinion side, and the news side. And those two are very different.
Yeah.
And I hope actually one of the changes that we are in the midst of making is looking for more conservative letter writers and Republican letter writers and Republican contributors to do guest opinions for us so that we do have those balance. But if only liberals are trusting the media and only liberals are writing letters to the editor, where am I supposed to get that Republican letter?
That's a fair criticism. So across, I don't even know if you call this, I don't even know how you hire, honestly. Like, how would you hire for something like this? It'd be really hard. But do you generally, is it challenging to get people with conservative views to write? Is that like, there's nobody there? So to your point, like, guys, we'd like to include someone with a really hard right opinion, but where are you all?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I haven't done a data analysis, and I love data, but I do think we probably get more letters to the editor and more guest opinion pieces from a liberal point of view than we do from a conservative point of view. The solution to that, if you're a conservative, is you send them.
Write more pieces.
Send more pieces. And it's, look, not everyone that's listening right now wants to write a guest opinion piece from a conservative point of view or a liberal point of view. Writing is hard. It's what I do for a living. It's not everyone's cup of tea. But, if you want to present a detailed argument that has factual basis, I want to see it. I want it coming to us. And so if you're avoiding doing that because you think we're too liberal, maybe you should try again.
Yeah. Maybe the part of the problem is people are opting out and there's no voices there.
And that's the opinion side, which is different from the news side.
Right, absolutely. It would be interesting. I do think I actually do think this was Fox News, but I think one of the coolest pursuits of opinion. Well, actually, there was the one with, was it called Hardball or something? And then I think Fox News had their own, which was Hannity and Combs. I really like that stuff. I like having both extremes so you can kind of understand, here's the news as I see it.
Right.
Here's what happened as I see it. Here's this person's take, and here's this person's take. And I will say there are opinions that I've had that are pretty deeply rooted that have changed because I heard someone on an opposite side of something talk about it. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that perspective existed.
Right.
It would be fascinating if the Register could have something like that. Fine, have a hard left view, have a hard right view.
Yeah, and we do, sort of a pro-con, display sometimes with for and against things. And, we're also going to make more efforts to reach out to people and say, hey, are you interested in writing about XYZ? And I think it's in part on us and it's part on the community members to, participate if they want to see their views reflected in those opinion pages.
I do have to agree with you because when I was on WHO radio, it's not a secret WHO radio is definitely right-leaning. I did my best to have about as center of a show as I could. I bashed both sides about as equally as I could. I called it data-driven opinion. Mm-hmm. But on that show, within 5 minutes, One on the text line, someone said, like, go back to CNN, you liberal hack. And then 5 minutes later, someone called me a fascist Nazi Republican.
Right.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's, to your point, you can have something about as straight down the narrow, zero bias, totally neutral, and someone is going to be upset with the bias but perceived in the piece.
And I don't think, our goal is not to equally anger both sides. Our goal is to be fair.
Right.
And so even if we write something that you don't personally agree with, I want you to nod your head and say, okay, good get. Don't love it, but that's fair.
Right. Trump's not a fan right now. Obviously,
no.
Not the biggest fan of the Register. Obviously, the Iowa poll was very controversial. It was a major. I actually looked this up. It's actually a historic blunder, which is crazy. So for those that don't know, the Iowa poll came out around November 2nd, and it was, of course, really, really inaccurate. I think it had Harris 47, Trump 44, 3 points to Harris. And of course, when their actual vote was certified, it was 55% Trump, 42% Harris. That's a 13-point swing in the other direction. I think it was actually worse than the 1980 Carter-Reagan swing, which was 13 points off. Of course, within just a little over a month, I think Selzer, she resigned. I think Carol Hunter, your predecessor, resigned. I don't know if these are related, but had you been there, what would have played out differently?
I'm not going to speculate on decisions of people who were here before I was.
No. Had you been there?
Yeah, but that's still hypothetical because I wasn't. I was in Nebraska at the time. So I can't help you with that hypothetical. And I will say, as you probably know, the president is now suing over that poll. And I can tell you that Gannett, our parent company, and the Register are defending us against that suit. There's been lots of back and forth on that. And, Trump has been an unfan of the Register several times before. I think the first time he ran, he may have said that no Register reporters can go to his events, period.
Wow.
And so I know that there were some reporters who were like, all right, if you're not going to let me come in as media, I'm just going to stand in line. I'm going to sign up and stand in line for 8 hours and I'll get in anyway, and I'll still cover it the way that the Register covers presidential candidates. And so, again, I wasn't here at the time, and so I'm not going to second guess the decisions that were made.
Yeah, and I'm glad you stated that. For those that don't know, Rachel had nothing to do with it. She wasn't here. I appreciate you bringing that up. Does it change any internal processes at all? Have there been discussions on, maybe we could have this check and balance, or maybe we could have this thing to prevent things like this from happening in the future?
Well, I will say that, as you probably know, the Iowa poll had a very rich legacy, before this one, and Ann Selzer had an excellent reputation. So it's not the same as questioning something that has been messed up so many times before. We haven't put out another Iowa poll since then. And so there are discussions about what to do next.
Yeah.
But right now we're focused on defending ourselves in court.
Absolutely. And I did reach out to a pollster friend of mine who has White House experience, and I can't name who it is, but this individual said, dude, 1 in 20 polls can be way off. It just happens. We have to guess the future, and there are a lot of things we use to balance that. Maybe she misunderstood or mispredicted voter turnout. There are a dozen. He goes, but this happens. He goes, I've seen it happen. He goes, so it's not insane. So to that point, yeah, it's definitely a tough spot. But here's another question about the partisanship and Trump unfan. Has there been a consideration of not endorsing presidential candidates moving forward? Because I know Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, has made that statement, and Patrick Soon-Shiong of the LA Times, the owner of the LA Times, has said they're also not going to endorse anybody anymore. Is the Register going to join that?
Well, I'm pretty sure the Register didn't endorse in the November election when I wasn't there. And I will say that I was, at that point, the executive editor over at the Omaha World-Herald, and we did make a decision not to endorse on some of those national races, in part because people already have so many sources of information. They don't need to be told by us what to do and how to vote. And so what we did in that case is we actually asked the 2 presidential candidates, as well as we had 2 U.S. Senate races and a House race, to the people on both sides to contribute and tell our readers why they should vote for them. And so we got a piece from Lara Trump that we ran on one side, and we got a piece from Kamala Harris that we ran on the other side, and it was called Side by Side, You Decide. And in some ways, it's sort of a very different relationship with readers, which is, look, you already have hard-baked opinion on whether you're a Democrat or Republican, particularly on a presidential race. Me saying who we think you should vote for isn't going to change you. Now, where it can make a difference is those races that are less covered. Back at the Omaha World Herald, we did I can't remember, but I think it was a 28-page voter guide section that went down to school board level so you could learn about every single person on your ballot. That's hard if you want to be an informed voter. And I think that's where, an organization like the Register can really make a difference.
Yeah. And do you even know why that tradition started? Because in my head, I try really hard to be about as neutral as possible. And I just never really understood the practice of, maintaining neutrality. We got to check our bias at the door, have an angle, but make sure you're not getting too far. But then let's endorse someone. I never understood that juxtaposition.
But I think that comes back to something we were talking about before, which is there's the news side and then there's the opinion side. And the opinion side can go its own way. And frankly, in a time when, the only place you would get much information was your local newspaper, having someone who actually sat down with the mayor or, in the Register's case, sat down with presidential candidates before a caucus, that you wouldn't have that opportunity to do was really valuable. I think times have changed in some ways because there just is more access to information, but it's telling stories in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing you bring up, which is the difference between news and opinion. And I generally don't think, and maybe you disagree with me, Rachel, but I generally don't think most news consumers understand that. I think they think everything under the Des Moines Register URL, in this case it's URL, it's not paper,
Sure.
But everything under that and anything under Wall Street Journal, anything under Chicago Tribune, LA Times is all purporting to be news. It's all news. And so when they see something that is opinion, people are like, well, this is clearly opinion. And you're like, well, yeah, it's in the, is this an education problem? Do we need to have different banners on on websites that Des Moines Register News, Des Moines Register Opinion? Sometimes some publications try to make it more clear, but what's the core challenge here?
Yeah, I do think that you will see things that are opinion at the Register are marked opinion. It says it very clearly, or letters to the editor. It says very clearly what the source of these are. But, I think that people do meld the two. And, again, I think it's a question of, try to tell the difference. We mark them. We tell you, if you want to say that everything in the Des Moines Register is liberal because you read a liberal opinion piece, it means that you're not opening your mind to everything else. I think it is a tough case because, most people aren't spending the time that I'm spending editing these pieces and digging into these pieces and questioning them and all those kind of things. I don't expect them to. That's why they have me there. So I do think there are issues there, but I also think we can always do better to explain what we are doing and how we're doing it.
Yeah, you mentioned the editing aspect. I know that there used to be just layers upon layers of editorial support, and these days there's not as much. Now, the newsroom's a little lighter than it used to be. Are there any ways technology, in the newsroom itself, everyone's talking about AI all the time.
Sure.
I'm going to smack myself in the head. Everyone talks about it so often, but are there any updates to the newsroom from new technology that allow that stuff to be more efficient? Or is the Register and Gannett pushing into technology in certain areas? Or are they saying, we're still not quite ready for that approach yet. We're going to stay old school.
Well, let's start with there used to be a lot more staff, and absolutely. And I've never met any editor who didn't want more staff. I would love many more people in my newsroom.
Right.
That said, when I started, spell check was still fairly new. And so if you think about all the people who had to spell check every single article, they
so
were
funny,
humans.
That's a great point.
Yes. we were, you and I were probably kids when we were we're spell checking, and our parents were like, you're doing what? How come you failed your spelling test? Well, I didn't need to learn how to spell, right? And so, yes, absolutely, we're adopting to new technology. There are things that we can do more quickly than we used to. Part of the Register lore is that it used to own a plane, and it used to own a plane, I'm told.
Seriously?
In part so it could get sports scores to the printing press quickly enough. Now you don't need a plane to do that, and while I want more staff, I don't need a plane. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Even from Qatar, whoever wants to give me a plane, you can keep it. Probably.
So no plans anytime soon on the Register copter.
Right. Exactly. It's not my current plan, but there are ways that we can use AI, to make us smarter. I mean, this is a silly example, but I've certainly been playing with ChatGPT and other things. And, I sent a note to the staff, to the other editors about things that happened this weekend. And then I put that through ChatGPT and I said, rewrite this in iambic pentameter.
Yeah.
And so I shared that version too. So that's silly, but that's, certainly I can write iambic pentameter. I've studied Shakespeare and all that kind of stuff, but it would take me forever. You should not expect news stories to be rewritten in iambic pentameter in the Register anytime soon. But I think that's just an example, a funny example, but the way that we can use generative AI to really improve what we can do. And so there are ways that we are using it right now. If you look at the Register, sometimes you will see that we used an AI assistant to write some summary text for the stories. And all of those are read by by a reporter and by an editor. But think about the time it takes to write 3 sentences after you've just written an article, or just did the headlines. It saves you time and you can fact check it. So there are ways that we're already using it that I think make a difference.
I don't think people understand. Like, people think of news reporting as here's some data and facts that were sent to us, and then we just write it. And that's why they're like, oh, AI will disrupt this job really easily. What they don't know is that it doesn't work that way. Like, a lot of journalism is digging and following instinct and hearing an interview and saying, hold up, they avoided answering that, or they said this trailing off sentence. What is behind that? A lot of it is instinct and really digging. I don't know if you disagree with this or agree with this. Is that something AI is ever going to figure out how to do? I mean, maybe in parts it can, but I feel like we still need gut instinct in some regard.
Well, I think journalism is essential to how we live our lives and how we are informed about the world. And I think it takes journalists to do journalism. There are some things that AI can do that maybe a journalist doesn't have to. We're not doing this, but let's talk about collecting box scores. That's a really big deal to people. But do you need a reporter and an editor to do that? Or is that something that we can better train AI to do? Again, I don't know the possibility there, but there's an example. What you can't do is profile the award-winning softball player. What does she look like when she's on the mound?
Right.
Did she cry when her parents came up to her after her championship? How does her hair look? How does she swing the bat? What are her special tricks? What's that quote that just stays with you? That kind of storytelling, I don't think AI can ever get.
I don't think so.
But there's ways that we can, and we do, and we will continue to do it.
Yeah. I know that one of the hardest transitions maybe in journalism was that whole weird print to web transition, and everyone was encouraged to put everything up on the web. And then they realized, oh my word, we've created a monster. We're not going to be able to get paid.
Yeah.
So is that a worry? Are we way beyond? I know the Register's paywalled, I think every news agency at this point. There are some free companies, but the Register is paywall. Then there are some you have open to normal readers. There's 2-3 article limits on some websites. Are we to a point now where an online business model, the Register, Gannett, and others have figured this out and they're profitable with that model?
Right. I think you started with something that I actually think about with AI and have read recently, which is, when digital first came to news, a lot of newspapers were like, ooh, bad, scary, stay away.
Right.
And then they were like, oh, we're going to give you everything. Both of those are wrong responses. And it's very similar with AI. We can't go, huddling under our desks because AI is coming. We should embrace the parts that work for us, learn more about it, and have it help us tell the stories of the people. And then onto the paywall idea, I think in many ways, you're right, that organizations started by training people that news is free. And you sort of forgot that it actually costs money to produce an article. You know,
Right.
there's a reporter involved, there's a photographer involved, there's video involved, there's editors involved, there's a platform involved, there's websites involved, like there are all these other things. And so the subscription model actually says, look, it's not free for us to produce it. Like when people complain about paying for the news, I'm like, well, do you think journalists deserve to eat?
Right.
I
know.
I
It is
kind of do.
bonkers. It's bonkers.
I kind of do. And so the subscription model, you know, does help us sort of think about, you know, that interchange. And I think in some ways, if I'm a reporter and my article gets subscriptions, I think that's a thrill. It says somebody thought it was worth paying for the work that you did. That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel Stassen-Berger, the EIC editor-in-chief of the Des Moines Register. Thank you so much for coming in here. What is the website if people want to go get a subscription?
Pretty easy to find, DesMoinesRegister.com.
And we will make sure to link that in the show
Let me
notes
also
as
say
well.
my email address is rachel@Register Media. I really mean what I say about community reach out. My last name is Stassen-Berger, so I got a special email, RACHEL, pretty easy to remember, at registermedia.com.
That is an easy one to remember. And for the record, there were no off-limits things in here. And so I think that does say a lot about you and how you will lead the Register. You're just like, yeah, let's come in and do the show. Let's talk about stuff. Before we got rolling, I was like, any other notes, anything you want? Nope, we're good. Let's just go. So really appreciate you coming on the
you
show.
know, I've been around enough politicians that if you ask me a question I don't want to answer, I can say words, but I don't have to answer the question.
Not all of them can. Rachel, thanks so
Thank
much
you
for coming on the show. And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa Podcast.